In an earlier video, I gave kind of an overview of the Prime Shorty bench and discussed a few of the pros and cons I've noted since taking ownership. As I mentioned in that video, one of the highlights of the Shorty so far, and I emphasize so far because I keep hearing about this illustrious leg attachment that apparently I'm not cool enough to see or know anything about. But anyway, a highlight so far is the preacher attachment and of course the dumbbell cradle. Now, I also alluded to it having some attachment vibes, so I will revisit that as well, but for now, let's talk about the back pad placement and how it affects the angle of the preacher pad and potentially your range of motion. Now, stay with me here because it's about to get really nerdy, but I'm going to show you how I've come to the conclusion that the preacher attachment was mostly designed for use with the bench pad in the 60-degree position. Now, I'm not saying that you can't use it in the 45-degree setting, or if you're really, really small, the 40-degree setting. Sorry, I hope that wasn't offensive, but in my experience and at my height, 5'11", or maybe more accurately, if I put the end of a tape measure into the smelly abyss that is my armpit and measure straight down to the bend of my wrist, I get a measurement of about 19 inches. And for me, the 60-degree position gives me enough room for full range of motion without interference from the cradle. Now, with the back pad at 45 degrees, I can go through the full range of motion, but it's tricky. I have to be very thoughtful of where the cradle is in relation to my hands, and if nothing else, it just interferes with my ability to focus on the mind-muscle connection because I'm fixated on the idea of not hitting the cradle. Then you get the back pad at 40 degrees, and well, you can see here, it ain't happening. Like, I'm just fucked. But it's all right, really. No one needs that many options anyway. Now, before I move on, let me just drive the nail in the coffin. And I'm doing this and I'm saying all this because it's not exactly intuitive. You know what I mean? Like, if you end up with the Shorty bench and you find yourself frustrated at first, just know you're not alone. And in every video or image of the Shorty bench that I've seen so far, including the Prime Fitness booth at Home Gym Con, the back pad is set at 45 degrees. And it would make sense because if you think about a preacher bench, then you know the pads are typically about 45 degrees, right? So check this out. This is a digital angle gauge, and I'll set it on the foot of the bench, calibrate it at 0 degrees, then set it on top of the preacher pad. And as you can see, with the bench pad at 60 degrees, the angle of the preacher pad actually reads at about 45 degrees. Okay, so let's move the back pad to 45-degree angle, and you'll see the elbow pad is now closer to about 58 degrees. Oddly though, the strength curve doesn't feel all that different from one angle to the next, but regardless, I think this data, along with everything else I've pointed out so far, solidifies my assessment that when you see grown-ass men using this bench in the 45-degree setting, and they look like fucking Donkey Kong climbing into a bee dasher before they take the W at Dolphin Shoals, just know that unless you're freakishly tall, there's probably a setting that will work for you, okay? I told you it was gonna get really nerdy. I'm just making a point to point that out. I just wanted to point that out because in the limited information that is available on the Shorty bench and the preacher attachment, that is something that I've seen consistently from one video to the next, and I just wanted to give you some peace of mind or alleviate any concerns that you might not be able to get full range of motion if you are about my size. Okay, so the pad. Before I forget, it's sufficiently sized at 26 inches wide by 8 1/4 with about 9 inches of open space in between. So small enough to store away, but big enough that it doesn't feel like it was made for a child. Now, I know I've mentioned this before, but I can't say it enough. I love how easy this thing is to attach and store. I can do it with one hand if I need to, and it's not unwieldy or anything like that. It's soft enough that I really just have no complaints as far as the pad itself goes. Now, it could be cool if the attachment piece was made to maybe like kind of rotate or something like that, but in reality, I don't know if it would be worth the additional cost or even the complexity, since it may or may not actually have real world value for the bicep curl movement. Okay, so the bench, the pad, we talked about those things. Let's move on to the dumbbell cradle. Now, I don't want to mince words or come across as if I'm unaware that preacher attachments on a weight bench are nothing new. I know I had one on my Weider bench in 1994, and I even modified one from York Barbell to fit on the end of my Rogue AB3 just a few years ago. So I am well aware. However, something that Prime does pretty often is to sort of take an existing concept or idea, reinvent it, and make it better without just completely ripping off or rebranding the same old thing that we've seen from every other company. The Shorty bench with the preacher attachment and the dumbbell cradle is just another example of that. Now, up until now, The preacher attachments that you've seen, if they have a place to rest your barbell at all, typically feature this little 4-inch bitch-ass piece of angle iron that's attached to the long post that goes into like a 1.75 or a 2x2 square tube. Setting your bar on that thing is asking for a broken toe, or I dare you to try to load or unload the bar with that piece of shit. That is another place that Prime really stands out here. The ability to set dumbbells into a cradle for dumbbell curls is nice, and also these UHMW brackets that hold the barbell to allow you to rack a curl bar and also load or unload. But like I said before, not perfect and has attachment vibes. For example, it's loose and wobbly on the post. For some reason, that doesn't actually bother me, which is weird because, as you probably know by now, I'm really picky about stuff. And I don't know, that just doesn't seem to hit my radar. But what does hit my radar is this rubber pad on the tip of the tube. It falls off sometimes when I'm removing the cradle, and I find that annoying. I can only imagine what that would be like in a high-traffic gym where no one gives a fuck about the equipment. Something else worth noting, and you would never expect this from a proper preacher curl bench, is while I do like having UHMW brackets for a curl bar, my bar has a tendency to slide left or right when it's on them, especially when loading and unloading. Although so far it has not been a safety concern, it's definitely something that gives it attachment vibes. Okay. Also, I find that turning the cradle around this way gives me more room for my hands without the risk of smashing them on the dumbbell cradles. Maybe give that a try if that's something that you've run into also. And lastly, and probably the one that I find absolute most annoying of all, are these titties. I don't know what else to call them. Bumpers, spacers, rubber thingies, nipples. I don't know. I'm going with titties for reasons that may be more obvious in a few minutes, but here's the problem. They fucking fall out. And it seems to be happening more often lately. I finish my workout, I go to put my stuff away, see a titty fall, bounce across the floor, and as soon as I find it, I discover that both of them had fallen out. Now, I have to spend a few minutes trying to stuff these things back into their tiny little hole, and I assume that one day they're gonna get lost or destroyed in the process. And I know some of you guys out there probably only ever do preacher curls in the hopes that maybe someday you might get to experience what it feels like to have a pair of titties in your hand, and that's okay, no judgment, but trust me, this is not a reward. No one wants to crawl around on their horse stall mat searching for a pair of titties that will inevitably fit in one hand. It's not what we had in mind, Prime. Let's do something about that. Maybe we can address this, the foot pad and the rubber pad at the top of the tip of the tube at the same time. I don't know. God, I hope my kids don't watch these videos. I think that covers it. I really don't know what else to say about the preacher feature on the shorty bench. I do like it. I'm glad that I don't have to give up the idea of having a formidable preacher curl due to my lack of floor space. And I'm glad that in reality, even the little nitpicky things that I pointed out earlier are exactly just that, nitpicky, and overall they don't overshadow the functionality at all. I'm calling it a win. MW Pig 5 saves 5% on the shorty bench, but will not save you shit on the preacher attachment or the dumbbell cradle. Like it, share it, comment, subscribe, tell your mom to stop DMing me, all that stuff.